The Nuggets hold practice. I'm going to bring you the actual audio or video from Michael Malone's comments, as well as an interesting tidbit from Zeke Nnaji. We'll talk about preseason game number 1 versus the Suns, what to expect, what not to expect, plus how to turn good preseason vibes into championship habits. All that and more on Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us and joining us on whatever platform that you've chosen, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or if you're joining the show on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com/LockedOnNuggets. Press the like and subscribe button, turn on notifications. You can join folks like Dr. Van de Strand back with us tonight. Malik Moore, Zamora hanging out with us. Lots of folks hanging out with us in the chat segment here on a Monday night. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, co-host of Locked On Nuggets and Locked On NBA. Glad to have you guys with us. Excited to have you on board for this show. Thanks for making us your first listen every day and being an everydayer. We are in the swing of things officially with the start of preseason. I want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50+ infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. On today's show, I've got practice audio for you. I took video today at practice to bring it to you, and we're going to do it live on the show. Never done this before. We're going to throw that in there for a little bit of an interactive element, and you'll be able to hear it on the podcast version, hopefully, as well. We will also, on today's show, talk about preseason game number 1 versus the Suns. Doesn't matter what to expect, what not to expect, who's going to play, who's not going to play, and why rotations are going to be something to watch, I think, in that game. Finally, we'll talk about turning vibes into habits. I've been having this conversation all day with both associates, just doing group texting some league personnel. I talked about in Locked On NBA with David Ramil. It's kind of an interesting subject, and I want to relate it to the Nuggets from what I saw at practice today. So we will do that. Let's get started with some comments from practice. So today, the Nuggets held practice once again. Very gracious to hold media availability again today, and jokingly, so Adam was there, and Adam was obviously out in San Diego. And the first question after every day is like, so what'd you see out there? And so like, there's this pause because there's a new beat writer, Bennett, for the Post. And usually Mike Singer is always like the first one with the question. And I tend not to ask the first question. I like to let the folks that are beat writers go first, but there was a little bit of a pause. And then Malone just started with, let me guess, Adam, what'd you see today? Yeah. So he said there was a good practice, good energy in the gym. The vibes continue to be really strong with this team. One thing I thought that was interesting was that I asked Malone a little bit about the fact that this team has always been a little bit quiet on the defensive end. Like that's just been a problem for them, is that they don't necessarily talk a lot on defense. And so I was kind of curious about whether that's been a problem in training camp, given that the veterans talked a lot about how they kind of solved that problem as the year went on. Malone, I'm going to warn you, just kind of deflected the main point of the question, but he did choose to go in another direction, and I thought it was interesting. Here's what Michael Malone had to say.
No, it's been pretty good to this point. Obviously, I hope that the communication comes up when we face adversity, but things aren't going well. Our guys willing to hold each other accountable. Those are tough conversations. Right now, preseason, everyone's communicating on the court, doing their job. But I want guys to take ownership of this team. I want Jamal and Nikola specifically to take ownership of this team. It can't be all on DJ. It can't all be on a veteran like Reggie or Justin or KCP. I think Nikola and Jamal, the impact they have, those are the guys that really have to step up and continue to be vocal.
That's Michael Malone from practice today. So I thought it was interesting that he's basically putting a lot of the onus on Jamal and Joker. And look, that's a pretty common thing. Even guys that have traditionally been talked about as quote unquote lead by example guys. And I made fun of that concept a lot because what it really means is that you don't lead. Like you're not somebody that talks to the team a lot. You just kind of go out and do your superstar thing and score a bunch of points. But like he's really putting the onus on them. Like he's putting the onus on the superstars to hold everybody accountable. And in part because like on defense, that's going to have to be, I think, where it starts. Like you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so if Jamal and Nikola are the ones that are kind of setting that tone for the accountability side of it, that's going to be important in setting that tone for everybody else, because we see this a lot with other teams where if the star player does not commit on defense, the other players are going to have a really hard time doing that dirty work. I think James Harden's teams are a very good example of this. There was like 2018 when the Rockets really buckled in because they knew they had a real shot at a championship with Chris Paul, but in general, the Rockets teams were pretty bad defensively, in part because, like, if your lead player is not going to commit to it, why are you going to do it? I think we saw the same thing with the Mavericks last year, where if Luka Doncic is going to complain up and down the floor and not really commit, I think it's kind of tough. And so I think it's important for Jamal to hold everybody accountable, including Nikola, and Nikola to hold everybody accountable, including Jamal. And those guys, like, they're the veterans now. They're the leaders. Like, it shouldn't be on, there is no Paul Millsap, right? We're past that point. Nikola's 27. Like 20, gonna be 28, past that point, right? It's gonna have to be. It can't be DeAndre Jordan. It can't be Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. It's gonna have to be Jamal, and it's gonna have to be Nikola, and that's gonna have to be, I think, an important part of what they bring to the table. I also asked Malone I want to know this: which of the young guys were impressing him defensively by competing? Oftentimes if I ask questions like, hey, impress you defensively, his answer is basically gonna be like, they're all rookies, so they're still getting the hang of it. But I thought his answer was kind of interesting when I asked him what rookies he thought were competing defensively, and he gave praise to all three of them.
The guys, I mean, all three rookies are workers. I mean, people think Julian is just a shooter and scorer. He's really impressed me with how quickly he's picked things up. And all the small things, the details. He's a quick learner, and he's out there showing he can be an impactful player on both ends of the floor. Hunter, he's got a motor. He knows nothing other than playing hard and being physical and competing. That's just in his DNA. And Jalen Pickett, I mean, strong physical guard, runs his team, really good playmaker, but he's also not going to allow Jamal or whoever else just for him to be a pushover. So all of our guys, man, we talked about, we have 16 days from today, including today, until opening night. And I challenge every single day is find a way to get better. And all three of the young guys have done a great job in terms of bringing that energy to practice.
So I think Strother getting as much attention as he has, I think, is notable. There has been a little bit of buzz, I think, around the team from people I talked to today that Strother is maybe a little bit ahead of what they maybe expected for a first training camp. There's a lot of praise for these rookies in general in terms of a very mature group. Now, some of that's just because they are literally much more mature than most rookies. DeAndre Jordan talked about that, about them being older guys. But they've been willing to listen. They've adapted to things, and they're not necessarily pushing for things more than they should. But I think if you're a Julian Strother truther like CT on Nuggets Twitter, I think you got to be pretty happy with Malone's comments because he singles out Strother as kind of a guy that has done that. I also think that Strother's probably shown from all indications he's got a little bit more of a complete game. He's not just going to be like a pure 3-and-D guy. That may be like what he looks like in the beginning in terms of his early minutes in the regular season, but he's showing things in practice that make you think like, oh, this is like a more complete basketball player already than maybe they were prepared for. I kind of look at Malone's comments and look at what, he talked about with Jalen Pickett. And I still think, and we kind of saw this at Summer League, I think Jalen Pickett's probably going to have some issues defensively. I think it's still going to be kind of a concern, and that could have some impacts on what the rotation looks like. It'll be an interesting test to see what he looks like in live game action in preseason, which we'll talk about in just a second. So the last thing I want to kind of mention, DeAndre Jordan talked today, and he was hilarious as always, and talked about, like, I asked him a question about culture, and he talked about the selflessness of the team, and I didn't get a chance to follow up, but a lot of this I think is honestly tied to the fact that guys aren't looking for shots and they're not looking about me, and part of that's because I mentioned this before, they're all paid, and that helps a lot. When you're not aiming for contracts, it helps a lot with sorting out those internal things that some teams deal with. Zeke Nnaji also spoke, and Zeke was asked a lot about the rebounding because Malone singled out his offensive rebounding as being a real bright spot in training camp, but said he wanted to see more of that on the defensive end. And I asked Zeke a question that I thought was really interesting, and the video didn't come out clean, so I'll just kind of relate to what he said. What I asked was, Zeke, I think, is in a difficult position rebounding because it's not just his body type. It's not just his aggressiveness. His primary advantage is that he's switchable, is that he's able to play on the perimeter. And if you're going to play him, and there was a lot of conversation today about sometimes DeAndre Jordan will play, and some like going back to that strategy that they kind of morphed into around midseason, where it was like Zeke played some nights and DJ played some nights. Like DJ is probably going to play more than you are prepared for early on in the season. I don't think it'll last, just based off of what I've seen from how those minutes have gone for DJ with various teams. I think DJ is extremely valuable to this team as a veteran. I think the minutes of him playing tend to get a little rough if he's relied on heavily. But if Zeke's playing, you're going to basically switch all. It's his versatility. It's tough to ask a guy, hey, I need you to switch onto this guard and chase him around a subsequent screen, stay with him, potentially contest a shot. Oh, by the way, also, you're going to need to want to get back and also rebound. And so I think that what Zeke did say was, I think I could do a better job when I'm not playing center. So if he's not switching, if he's playing drop, or if he's playing power forward, being more aggressive on the glass, like filling in some of that Michael Porter Jr. absence. I think that's maybe going to be an area where Zeke really has to prove himself if he's going to cement himself in the solid rotation as at least splitting time with DJ for the backup 5 position. I think that's important to know. On the other side, we'll talk about preseason game number 1. Who's going to play? Who's not going to play? And what I'm looking for in terms of the rotations. We'll talk about that on the other side on Locked On Nuggets. But first, I need to tell you about the Jase case with Jase Medical. So my wife often gets these sinus infections, and the problem is she'll get them in the winter. And if you're in Colorado, you know that we get snow a lot. And there's been a couple of times through the years when we've actually been snowed in, and she's had a sinus infection. And she's had to wait to get an antibiotic, and it's gotten worse. And, you know, sometimes it can get pretty scary. So Jase Medical is there for you in the event that you're worried about just such an event. It's simple. You just go online, you fill out a form, and you get a prescription, life-saving medications right to your door with the help of a licensed medical professional. The Jase case gives you that peace of mind, so you're not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. They make sure that you have the medication in hand when you need it. You get $20 off on these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical by using my code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us, making this part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us on a Tuesday. Let's talk about preseason game number 1. Michael Porter Jr. was at practice today. No boot, no brace, no wrap. Ankle was totally free and clear. I saw him doing sideline sprints, doing shuffles all across the sideline. No inhibitions whatsoever. He did not practice today, however. He was held out once again, being cautious. It's not a big deal, but he is unlikely to play in tomorrow's game. So the Nuggets will not have the starting 5 for the first preseason game versus the Suns. Christian Braun also missed practice, and he was on the trainer's table when we came in. I would say that it's like questionable for him to play in that preseason game as well. Christian's probably more likely than MPJ, just given a number of factors, but it's also possible we might not see either of those guys. What'll be interesting to see is like who he decides to start in the event that MPJ is out, because you haven't heard a lot about Peyton Watson, right? And so like this becomes a question of which direction does he go? Does he go to Christian Braun if he's available? Probably. That's Christian is like the guy that's like most locked in terms of being in the rotation. Knows how to play with Joker, etc. Can do a facsimile of what they want to do offensively. Understands that system, I think, the best. What'll also be interesting, though, I think, is we're probably going to see a fair amount of Justin Holiday with the starters. I would imagine that he gets a pretty good burn run in tomorrow's game. Malone's been pretty upfront. He's already said that he's planning on playing the starters tomorrow, but probably only for a half. And I think that that's like an interesting kind of setup. I am going to be most interested. Malone talked about today. One of the things that he kind of mentioned was how much there is like still this idea of he doesn't want He does not want to be playing Nikola, Jokic, and Jamal Murray 38 minutes on night one. Like, he doesn't want to be doing that. From the very get-go, he wants to be able to go to his bench and keep Jamal and then Joker down below 35 minutes, probably closer to 32. Like, that's the dream, right? Is you play Joker like 32 minutes a night. To do that, though, you got to figure out your rotations, and that's why I think the preseason is going to be interesting. This first game is usually treated as a warm-up, much like in the NFL, where it's like the first one is just to get your feet wet, remember how to do the NFL game things, and then you work your way up, and then you ramp down, where the last one, no one plays. I think we're going to see something kind of similar here, where the first game really is about getting your feet wet. But I do wonder if the Nuggets would probably behoove themselves in trying out some lineups to see what actually does work, especially with the starters. I've kind of shifted my concern with the Nuggets from, the bench to what's the staggered lineups going to be like, because ultimately the starting unit, when healthy, is going to be so dominant. It's going to cover up for a lot of the problems of the non-Joker minutes. Like, again, Nikola was plus 12 on court and minus 10 off last year. So a plus 2 net, right? All you're really going to do is get that down to like minus 7, which is not hard. And then I honestly think that the starters could be even better this season. I think they'll probably be one of the top 3 best starting fives in basketball in terms of net rating when they're fully healthy and available. And I don't think that in MPJ's case, they need all this time together. Like, I don't think the starters need to go out there and like remember how to do it. By all indications, they've absolutely killed the scrimmages. They've killed in every sort of like game environment. The starters are good. It's figuring out the some starters, some not, that I think that they need to actually spend some time with. I'll be really curious to see if Peyton Watson does indeed start and if they give him a big opportunity to fill in, or Zeke Nnaji, right? I think with both guys, there's a very big drive for, hey, we need you to step up. Like, those are 2 guys, Strother, Pickett, Tyson, Holiday, even to a degree. Like, Reggie Jackson is almost going to be there by default. Like, there's not another ball handler you can trust. There's just not. They don't have one. Like, CB can bring the ball up sometimes, but you're not going to play him a point guard. You're going to have a point guard on the floor, and it's going to be Reggie Jackson, right? But with the rookies, I do think that there's kind of even though they drafted them with like, hey, we drafted you because we think you can play immediately. We think that we drafted you older. We drafted you more mature. We drafted you more refined. We drafted you because we think you're ready to play in the NBA right now. But there's not an expectation. There's an expectation on Peyton Watson. There's an expectation on Zeke Nnaji. And so I do think the team to some degree, at least, is pushing to give them opportunities up front. And so I'm going to be very curious to see, does Zeke play the backup 4? Does Zeke start at the 4 tomorrow? Does Peyton Watson start at the 4? Does Zeke start at the 5 tomorrow in the backup minutes? Does he start the second half for Nikola at the 5? What does that look like? What's the rebounding like? These games, I think, are always interesting because you almost have to ignore the matchups, right? It's all about you. You're working on your stuff and how you look. The problem I do kind of have with that, though, is like, I'm watching these preseason games for other teams, and a lot of it is like, no, like, but the guy had a bad matchup that night. Like, he had a bad matchup in that particular situation. So even though you're trying to run your stuff, you're still having to deal with like the physical or skill level competition that you're facing, which isn't the same across all season, right? So, if Peyton Watson has trouble for whatever reason with whoever on the Suns, depending on who plays, I think there's an opportunity that for Peyton to really shine. But if he struggles, it's like, is that really meaningful? Or did he struggle specifically against the Suns? And taking stuff away from it, I think, is tough. And it's especially difficult, I think, when you have these guys that are in this position of like, wait, we need you to really succeed, which is why I think not only in this game, but going forward, Malone, I think, is going to have to try a lot of different lineups. And he gets to, right? You will always play like a lot of weird lineups in preseason. You go through the numbers and it's just crazy how many different combos you'll get. But I think it's going to be key to see this is like, what approach does he take to finding those answers? Because Malone may not necessarily try and solve these things in preseason. This may be something that he waits to solve until the regular season begins. In part because, like, I'm not sure how much the Nuggets have really installed in practice. I think they're refining habits right now. I think they're defining competitiveness. I think they're defining roles. I think they're defining principles. I don't think necessarily that they're like installing what the team is going to look like. And that's going to happen over the course of this preseason, but it's also going to extend into the regular season. And we saw this last year where things were pretty much constantly in flux, honestly, until like February. Like that was when he really kind of shifted. Like, all right, CB's in the rotation. And then he had Peyton in there who didn't play in the playoffs. But like they kind of settled into what they were going to do, especially with Jamal coming off the bench, playing with the second unit. This is all to say that preseason does matter. And the lineups, I think, do matter. And there's a lot of questions I think that they're going to have to figure out. There's so much that I think we know about the Nuggets. They're going to be a playoff team. They're going to be awesome when the starters are healthy and on the floor. It's everything else that I think we still have some questions about. We don't know everything there is to know. And that includes like the positive stuff, which is we don't know how good CB is going to be. CB could be amazing tomorrow. If Christian Brown showcases that he's got way better handle and control of the ball, and especially if he and Julian Strouth are able to show like, hey, this is two wings now that can produce more than we expected when they have the ball in their hands, that takes a huge amount of pressure off of Reggie Jackson and by extension, Zeke Nnaji and DeAndre Jordan for not having to hold up a pick and roll game. So get to watch the team tomorrow, which is exciting. Steve says that it does matter that we get to watch our championship team again tomorrow. You get to watch the reigning NBA champion Denver Nuggets tomorrow in action in preseason game one, number one. And we'll, of course, have your post-game show right here on Locked On Nuggets. Tomorrow, or I'm sorry, next segment, we're going to talk about why I think vibes matter. I've kind of come around on this about preseason and why vibes matter and what it is that you really need to do, what the Nuggets need to do with all of the good energy that they have in the gym, what they need to do with that in order to put themselves in a position to repeat. We'll talk about that on the other side when we return on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets, thanks for joining us, making this part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us. Matt Moore with you on a Tuesday night. Swipa will be with me tomorrow. We'll do reaction from preseason game number one tomorrow on Locked On Nuggets. Make sure to go to the YouTube page, youtube.com/LockedOnNuggets, and subscribe. Help us out. Best way to support the show. Go check out the YouTube page. Let's talk about vibes. So I was thinking about this because the league right now, the NBA, I've done this long enough to where I can I've gotten really good at reading through quotes and seeing through video and paying attention to small details and knowing when a team is really in a good place or when they're just like saying the same trite things as always. And you can kind of catch this. There are an abnormally high number of teams, I think, in a good place right now in this preseason. There are always going to be a handful of teams that are going through it. I think the Dallas Mavericks, to a certain degree, are going through it. I think the Philadelphia 76ers, obviously, are kind of going through it. I think there are a couple of other teams, I think, that are less enthused than others. But you have teams like the Charlotte Hornets, who I think are genuinely having like a real, hey, we're going to be good. Like, we're not going to be terrible. They may not be above 500, but we're going to be like in competition for like a play-in spot. I think the Houston Rockets are a team that's like, look, we've been garbage and we're not going to be garbage this year. Like, this is different. And I think there's real optimism. That can fade very quickly, and it can change in the blink of an eye with an injury. But there are a lot of teams, I think, that have a good vibe. The Golden State Warriors, by all accounts, have like a renewed sense of focus after last year. There's a real like, we have to make it clear that that was an aberration and not the start of a decline. The Lakers, obviously, I think, are just really motivated with the idea of like, we're the team that made the Western Conference Finals, and we were really close with the Nuggets, and we should have won game one and game two and game three and game four and I don't know, game five and game six and game seven. They seem very focused on having the Nuggets in their sights, which, you know, again, don't do that. You want to make sure you do have to beat all the other teams in the West too, plus figure out a way to beat Joker. But there's a lot of optimism, and the Nuggets are amongst those teams. They're talking to media members. It's not just Adam. It's not just the guys at DNVR who've talked about this on their shows. It's also the beat writers. It's also folks around the team. There was kind of this like, well, it's probably going to be a little bit rough early on because it was a short off season. And DeAndre Jordan kind of mentioned this today. He's like, it was 3 months. Like, I was like, oh no, it's only gonna be 90 days, but like, it's 3 months. You got 3 months off. And so like they came back and they really are energized. And the biggest thing, and Adam and I kind of talked about this last night, was the Nuggets do seem excited to play. Like, they want to play basketball. They like playing basketball together. They understand what makes this team great and how good this is. And I think the championship in a lot of ways took it to such a higher level, in that I think before it was like, yeah, we play like a really fun brand of basketball, but like, can we win? Because that's always been a thing. That was a thing with the Suns when they played 7 seconds or less. And it was a thing with the Thunder in 2012 and like all of these types, the Lob City, right? All of these different teams may have played a fun brand of basketball. But if you don't win, there's always are we doing it the right way? And the Nuggets know that the way that they've done things, that they bought in and dedicated themselves to, was the right way. And everybody knows it. And like other teams, I think, want to play like the Nuggets now. And that matters. So the vibes are really good in training camp. The vibes are really good in preseason. But the key is going to be channeling that into habits. You have to mold that energy and use it to carry you through when it's January. There's this Instagram meme that I really like, which is from a play, which is a very interesting play, by the way. And it's this girl going, I don't really want to do the work today. That's how a lot of teams get in January. January and February, and especially March. A lot of teams are just like, I don't really want to do the work today. That's how they are. Because it's a drag. You're tired. You're exhausted. You've been on 3 flights in 5 days, played 3 games in 5 days. You're in some Midwest city that you barely are like, oh yeah, I guess we're playing Giannis tonight. It's a grind, and it really wears you down. And so you have to take this energy that you have right now and channel it into the habits. Ryan Blackburn talked about this all early last season, about building championship habits. And he was really worried because they didn't do it for the first 2 months. But he was also one of the staunchest believers in this team, more so than I was. In early March, he was like, they've done it. They have championship habits, and it carried them through. And he was right. So one of the fun things is like, you got to do it all over again. And Malone's been very big on this, that no one's talking about last year, because you got to do the work all over again. You basically erase everything in the 3 months that you take off to get your body right. And then you got to remember your rotations, how to help and when to recover, your timing on those sequences, how to call out the switch, when to call out the switch, when to go under, when to go over. And that's just the defensive stuff. When to cut, when to shoot, when to make sure that you're coming off, when to make sure that you're sprinting to the corners, and keeping those habits consistent. And it's really important to carry the energy that they've got and be able to put it into those. Steve says, Joker by all accounts is a leader in having those championship habits. I absolutely agree. But the rest of that team is not Joker. And that's not like, I honestly don't think it's a knock. I think it's more a matter of they've got to help one another. And like, this gets back to what Malone was talking about with the accountability, is everyone's got to set the tone of, we're going to take this energy and these things that make us love playing basketball for this team in particular. Because I will say it, like, I think guys love playing for this team more than I'm used to seeing guys loving to play in the NBA because of the style that they play. And they have to take those things and translate them into things that are repeatable, consistent across teams, because that's one of the opportunities that I think is in front of the Nuggets this year. Everyone is kind of aware. If you go back and you look at because I've done it. If you go back and look at the records for the Nuggets versus teams under 500, it's excellent. It doesn't feel that way because they do things like lose to the Pistons at home, but it's really common for those teams to happen. And historically, the Nuggets have done that. But one of the differences is that they don't dominate those games. They just kind of eke them out. And there is, I think, an opportunity with this team to be the kind of squad that wins 57 to 62 games easy. Like, just with excellence, continuity, and habits. Like that, those 3 things in concert will get you to 55 plus wins, the 1 seed, and an easier route to the Western Conference Finals. but you have to do it, because if you're inconsistent, especially with the depth that they've lost, if you're inconsistent, then it is going to be like, well, they went 2-2 on the road trip. They got that big win versus the Cavs, but they lost to the Celtics on the back-to-back. Okay. But then they dropped the next one to the Wizards before they beat the Magic. You got to get rid of that. It's got to be, nope. Like, our habits are so good that our floor is we beat Cavs, Wizards, Magic 3-1. Took the Celtics game off. No big deal. I'm making that stuff up in terms of the schedule. And that's where I think the Nuggets have to get to. I've talked a lot about how I'm skeptical of this Nuggets team in terms of the overall win rating. And I still am, because this is based off of, my numbers are based off of last year's performance, factoring the adjustments that were made in the offseason in terms of losing Bruce, losing Jeff, even though he was a negative, and adding guys that are not known. But the ceiling for this team and that's wrong. The Nuggets have the ability with Nikola and Jamal and the starting five to build a floor that is so high that it carries them despite all these issues. That they're a better basketball team overall, to a degree where the regular season goes from a chore to light work. That's the key, is you take the vibes and the good energy and the love of the process and the work that these guys seem to have, and you translate it into an ability to be so far above it that these games that are a drag aren't as hard as they can be for a lot of teams in the NBA. And that's how the Nuggets can get back to the 1 seed. And that's how the Nuggets can do that while keeping their minutes for the starters at a reasonable pace. We'll see what happens in preseason game number 1. I'm excited to watch it. We'll have a reaction tomorrow night. Swipe and I'll be on with you after the game here on the live show. I will try and time it up. Probably, I will be honest with you, we will probably try. We'll see when we may go live during DNVR. I don't know. Probably I will try and avoid it, but we'll see. And yeah, we'll have you covered with all things going forward. We'll be with you tomorrow. Swipe it with you on Thursday. Adam and Swipe it on Friday as we continue. You got another preseason game later this week. Preseason's on. Nuggets basketball is back. And we'll talk to you guys again next time on Locked On Nuggets.